Hi everyone, I'm Matt.
I'm Ryan.
And today we'll be answering a question that is very important and very current. And that question is, could Bernie Sanders' higher education policy be realistic in the United States? So in order to answer this question, we're going to be introducing three topics. First topic is Bernie's actual higher education policy. The second topic is the Scandinavian higher education model and the societal model. And you may be wondering why we're talking about the Scandinavian model, but that is because Bernie draws a lot of inspiration from this region and that education system and that society. So we think it's important. And the third topic is that we want to translate Bernie's policy to the US. Does it work? Does it not work? Is it realistic? Is it not realistic? So now here's Ryan to talk about Bernie's actual higher education policy.
So as Matt's going to speak about and just briefly spoke about, Bernie Sanders' higher education model resembles the Scandinavian model very closely. Higher education in Scandinavia is free due to their extremely high tax rates. So to dive into Bernie's model, the first component of Sanders' higher education is that he's addressing how much the federal government makes or will make over the next decade, which is $110 billion off of Pell Grants, etc. Sanders' plan is with this extra money he would lower student loan interest rates that are at like an all-time high right now. They're around 5 to 7%. Bernie proposes that he could get them back down to 4.29 or 2.37, and current rates would also be able to be refinanced to those. Sanders also would propose a bill for full financial aid to cover tuition, room, board, and he's also trying to triple the amount of work-study programs to help take some financial burden off of us. This wouldn't all come cheap, of course. It's estimated that this would cost $75 billion a year, up from the current $35 billion in Pell Grants. Sanders states that this funding would come from Wall Street speculators who he claims ruined the economy in 2008 and 2009. At this point, Sanders does have some believers and some people backing him up. He has 1,000 economists who have endorsed his plan. And now Matt will take it away.
Okay, so going back to the Scandinavian higher education model, first and foremost, you have free tuition. So that makes education very affordable and easy to access. Second, you have, like we know, there's no such thing as free lunch. And so students can actually take out student aid in order to pay for school supplies like books, paper, pencils, anything to help them succeed at that level. So those are two distinct characteristics. Second or third, you have excellent education. It's world-renowned. A lot of other countries send representatives towards these regions like Finland and Sweden to learn more about what they're doing right and what they can improve on. And so an example of that is Finland has actually been ranked in the top 3 since 2000 of the PISA surveys. And these surveys, they're an organization that tests various countries' education systems and how well they're doing. So when you've got a country like Finland competing with South Korea and Japan ever since 2000, you know you're doing something right. So that's about the education model, and it's doing well, it's affordable, but in order for it to continue to be successful, you need a society that allows it to be successful. And enter the Scandinavian societal model. You have a 60% personal income tax rate. That's an astronomical number. It's second in the world, just behind Aruba. And compare that to the US, which has around a 40%. So you're talking about a major difference between two regions. So you have the personal income tax rate, and second, you have a very expensive living, like clothes, food, housing. These don't come cheap, and so when you live in this region, you have to pay a lot of taxes and you have to live on a frugal basis. And the third, this kind of counters the first two. You have an excellent social security basis. You have a lot of great programs like health insurance and things such as the unemployment benefits, which a lot of people see as advantageous towards themselves, and that kind of creates a mentality of, hey, I can live off the system. I can live off the system of having no job, but I can also find a place where I can get food. I can be clothed. I can have a warm shelter. So it's a better advantage to live off the system rather than struggle in the workforce. So an example of this, if you turn towards over there, you can see the unemployment rate in 2015. So a comparison between the US and the 4 regions of Scandinavia, which are Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And as you can see, Finland leads them all with 9% unemployment rate. Sweden comes in with a close second, around 7%, and the US tops in at 3 with around 5%, followed by Denmark and Norway just below the US. So not only does this show that the Finland and the Scandinavian region in general have a lot of unemployment, but it's a cultural value. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that there's a mentality in this region to, it's okay to live off the system. It's accepted to have your government provide more for you. So this just kind of shows and exemplifies that it's a very cultural distinction between the US and Scandinavia in terms of living off the social security system. So let's get back to how does Bernie's policy actually translate to the US? And it does not paint a pretty picture. First, you have the bad economic impact. When you're talking about a 90% tax rate on Wall Street, you're talking about stocks going way down. You're talking about the stock value plummeting. And you also have to consider that higher taxes would mean a decrease in trade. It would mean investments being scared away, investors being scared away. So you're talking about investments and investors going down. So not only does it leave a long path of economic ruin in its wake, you also have the factors of division. As we know, the US is very politically divided, Republicans and Democrats, and we know that Congress is a very divided system. It's very stubborn. If it doesn't see a policy that it doesn't like, or if it sees a policy that it doesn't like, it's going to be very stubborn about it. It's going to say, hey, I'm going to take as long as possible to see that this policy or law doesn't go through. So we know that it's a very divided system politically. And third, the comparisons just don't add up. First, you have a country of the US that has 318 million compared to Scandinavia, which averages around 5 million per 4 countries. So you're talking about huge numbers, and not only the population, but you're talking about the tax rate. Like I said, a 60% tax rate in Scandinavia is a major jump from a 40%.
Check, 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 check. What the heck happened there? The microphone's just. Check, 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 check. So I'll give him this one.
I think you should play it back, make sure the audio went through.
Oh shit.
Just, easy. Just wait.
What's
Check right here.
Oh.
Now? So like I was saying, Bernie's education policy just doesn't translate well to the US. It has a bad economic impact. Like I said, higher taxes means a decrease in trade, decrease in investment, decrease in investors, and when you have a 90% tax on Wall Street, stock value is going to go plummeting down. Then you also have the factor of US division politically. As we know, Congress is very divided politically, very stubborn, trying to get bills to pass through. So we know that this bill, especially if it's $75 billion a year, that's going to take a long time if it ever does come to fruition. So not only do you have the political dividedness, you have a bad economic impact, you also have the comparisons that just don't add up. You have a country, like I said, 318 million compared to a region that has, on average, around 5 million per country. Then you have a 60% tax rate in Scandinavia compared to a 40% tax rate in the US. So these numbers just don't add up, and in essence what Bernie is trying to do is he's trying to apply the success of one small region, and in this region it works well, the system does work, and he's trying to apply that success over to another region that's way too big, way too divided, and way too diverse for this policy to ever translate well. So now Ryan is going to answer our research question.
So after my in-depth analysis of Bernie's plan and Matt's comparison to the Scandinavian plan, we conclude that it would not be feasible for Bernie to implement his higher education plan for the reasons that Matt said and for reasons I'm going to state. First, the increase in taxes would cause way too much economic backlash, and increasing Pell Grant spending by 50% is just not feasible. When looking at Sweden's unemployment, for instance, like Matt showed, it's 3.4 percentage points higher than the US right now. So, I mean, they're really not graduating and getting jobs as much as we are, obviously. And they're graduating with the biggest debt-to-income ratio in the world currently. Also, the difference in size, it just wouldn't really translate at all. So after our analysis, we concluded it would not be feasible.
And that's the end, and thank you.
Okay, you're out.
It's hot up here.
Rough day to wear black, man.
It's my color. It's all I wear. I love black.
Ready, 5, 4, 3.
Hi everyone, we're here to talk to you about the higher education bubble. Our group is researching the parallels between the housing bubble and the higher education student debt crisis in order to discern if we are in a higher education bubble. My portion of the project focuses on the impact of debt on the economy, specifically private debt, because mortgages and student loans are its two largest components, based on a paper by Michael Biggs, The Credit Impulse, which is the acceleration of the level of credit loaned, is a major leading indicator of recessions. Its mirror of indebtedness accounts for the acceleration of the level of private debt, and that's the rate of change of debt, and that gives you aggregate demand when added to GDP. Change in debt is the most volatile part of GDP, and when it falls at a slowing acceleration, it can give the illusion of a recovery. Long-term correlations suggest that changes in the rate of growth of debt drives changes in unemployment and in economic cycles. So from 1980 to 2013, the costs of a 4-year college education in the US tripled, while median personal income has not budged. So people are paying more for college with the same amount of money. We must ask if a college education adds value to the economy. The loan debt is increasing at a compounding rate each year with a sizable portion in default or delinquency. All of this money is taken out of the economy, resulting in diminished growth because it's not given to entrepreneurs and companies. It's all for the sake of pumping money into what looks to be a risky investment. Costs of a 4-year education spiked after money was guaranteed. The problem with the thesis that higher education adds value to the economy is that median income has stayed flat despite massive increases in access over the past 50 years. So mandated access is forcing a push economy when globalization is moving us towards a pull economy. Increased access and subsidies increases demand, artificially raising the price. About half of students drop out before they graduate. A study from the New York Federal Reserve found that fees increase with more subsidizing. There is correlation and causation, so fees rise following policy changes. Knowledge is no longer a stock from which economic value can be extracted. It's becoming a flow because of technological changes and globalization, which is causing global competition. So now I'm going to pass it off to Sarah.
Thank you. There are pros and cons to every investment. So most people attend college to get a good paying job after, and many people consider it to be a good investment. But consider this.
Yeah, it's right.
Okay. Student loans are the second highest portion of household debt following mortgages, and that's just over $1.3 trillion. And that is projected to rise to $3.3 trillion in the next 10 years. Lending information on defaults suggests that 1/3 of loans will go unpaid. Graduates need a starting salary of at least $40,000 a year to significantly deleverage. So in 2012, the number of undergraduates enrolled in degree-granting post-secondary institutions was 2.5 million. Out of that 2.5 million students, about 2.1 million received federal aid. That's 87% of people who needed help paying for a post-secondary education, when just 10 years before, the number was an entire 10 percentage points lower. So I put together a graph depicting the tuition increase of public four-year colleges over time. In the academic year of 1976 to 1977, the average cost of tuition, fees, room and board was equivalent to just under $8,000. And when that is adjusted for inflation, that is adjusted for inflation. In 2015, that number reached 19,000. And this is due to the enrollment of college attendance doubling. It's also due to colleges adding administrative staff at an astonishing rate, also adding amenities and increases in salary for athletic coaches, as well as benefits for staff. David Hodge, the president of Miami University of Ohio, doesn't see the spending as a waste. He explained it by saying that the amount of students in the colleges charging higher tuition do so because everyone expects them to everyone expects them to have greater career services, have greater security, and students are also coming in with more and more emotional needs and physical disabilities. So those accommodations are what the charges are for, he's saying, and he says that since it's an investment in students, it's a good thing and it's necessary. This graph on the screen shows that throughout the years, the distance between tuition being covered by financial aid alone grew, and in 2010, the financial aid covered less than half of tuition. So the perfect summation, changing demand changes the market. And next we'll look at the housing bubble and see if there's a solution we can use before the student loan bubble bursts. And I'll hand it off to Ryan.
Yep. How's everyone doing today? My name is Ryan Coburn, since we didn't introduce ourselves earlier today. So you're probably wondering, what's the current student loan situation to the housing bubble? To answer this question, we will focus on the $800 billion housing bubble and the subprime lending in for-profit institutions that students are unable to pay off. The exhibit shown here illustrates the relation between the core CPI, current college tuition and fees, and the K-share or home price index. From what we observe here, we can see the parallel relationship between the college tuition and the home price index during the recession. As we can observe here, the price index declined below college tuition, defining how large an issue of the housing bubble poses to the public. When students are unable to pay these loans, the loans are unable to be discharged, creating bankruptcy that students are unable to maintain effectively. From what we have observed from this graph, the recession was responsible for the largest drop of price in the history of American capitalism. Now we will go in depth between college tuition and home prices by showing the relationship between the price of, Is this the right one?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we will go in depth between the college tuition and home prices by showing the relationship between the price of college tuition, home prices, and CPI. As you can see, college tuition has exceeded 10 times over the peak level. Where housing exceeded 4 times over its peak level. Both tuition price and home prices exceeded the Consumer Price Index by 1996, which has to do with the Tax Relief Acts in 1996 that that I will go into detail in a few minutes. From what we see here in the following real house price data below, the composite 20 index surpasses both the CoreLogic HPI and the national index during early recession. The composite 20 index is parallel to the CoreLogic house price index during the recession, which resulted to what we know now as the housing bubble. With the rise of foreign competition, every value invested in college tuition is lower than expected, making it much more difficult to obtain college tuition. To show you the seriousness of the scenario in this, I will now go in depth in subprime lending, which allowed lenders to give out loans that were not affordable to borrowers. The loans had higher interest rates, poor quality collateral, and less favorable terms in order to compensate for higher credit risk. The subprime loans were packaged into mortgage-backed securities, also known as MBS. These mortgage-backed securities ultimately defaulted, contributing to the crisis of 2007 to 2008. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York Consumer Credit Panel, it was estimated that 57% who borrowed subprime loans owed more capital on their student loans than those who did not borrow subprime loans. When borrowers who entered repayment from 1996 to 2006, less than 40%, it was estimated, saw an increase in their balances prior to post-graduation. In the mid-2000s, these lenders of the subprime loans approved borrowers with shaky credit to no credit as a way to deposit mortgages with little concern or risk so that the loans could be repaid efficiently. Right. And finally, I will focus on the policies that are accountable of the housing bubble and the increase of college tuition CPI. Mandated loans promoted affordable housing through the Community Reinvestment Act and government-sponsored entities, also known as GSFs. Deregulation allowed many risk-related products such as adjustable rate mortgages, which played a part in creation. During the dot-com crash and the 2001-2002 recession, interest rates reached historically lowered rates after the Federal Reserve changed the low levels from 6.5% to 1%. However, these lower interest loans soon became inflated after inconsistent home price CPI. As a result of the Section 121 exclusion, the Tax Reform Act in 1986 was created to eliminate these tax deductions for interest paid on credit. The Taxpayer Relief Act in 1997, by the other hand, repealed the Section 121 exclusion, which was made about a while ago which made housing the only investment which escaped capital gains. The problem with this, however, was that it encouraged people to buy homes and investments when the interest rates were low and no good. So now I'm going to pass it over to Jameson, who will be going over the parallels of the housing bubble and the education bubble.
Thank you. So the parallels between the two bubbles is uncanny. In both cases, loans were guaranteed with no consideration of future ability to pay or history of repaying debts. Banks had to lower standards which had been in place for over a century, creating huge amounts of demand. A bubble and inevitably reality would intervene, as it might do in the higher education bubble. So we're proposing policies be put in place such as a forgiveness of student debt or a student debt jubilee, a liquidity tax to stabilize and safeguard circulation and velocity of money, local currencies to cushion us from the negative effects of globalization, and perhaps more pluralism in the classroom to encourage policies like this. And that's the end. Thank you.
I just want to say that if anyone didn't understand like any of my slides, does anybody want to see any of the slides that I placed in the presentation, since I forgot to move over to my slides? Is anybody? Okay.
No, I think they're good.
Very close. Ready in 5, 4, 3.
Hey guys, my name's Erin Ferguson.
And I'm Claudia Heaney.
And today we're actually going to be talking about depression and its effects on the University of Rhode Island and its students and the overall effect on higher education. So the overall title of our presentation is called Depressing Potential at the University of Rhode Island. First off, we're going to start with talking about exactly what depression is, the symptoms, and how it's really a deep-rooted issue that demands attention. So currently, obviously we know that depression obviously includes the feelings of worthlessness, helplessness, a large range of them, but due to time constraints, we won't really dive into that too much, and in severe cases, thoughts of death or suicide. So why it's a current issue and why it demands attention. In 2010, the American College Health Association actually reported that 45.6% of students reported feeling helpless, and 30.7% of students actually responded with feeling depressed and finding difficulty in their normal lives. So obviously that's a huge issue in terms of being students and being active within the role of your education. If you're feeling depressed and not you want to go up and get out of class, that's obviously going to negatively affect you. Obviously there's needs for treatment and change. With persistent sadness, obviously you have to address those issues head on. So that's kind of one of the main issues that we're going to be talking about. And the main reason this is a deep-rooted issue, in 2006, in the annual report of college mental health directors, 92% of them responded with saying that mental health is a major rising issue on their college campuses, and this is only continuing as we go forward.
So as Erin began to explain, not only is student depression a very serious problem, it's also a problem that is growing. It's been growing in the general population, and enrollment in degree-granting institutions has also been increasing. Not only that, but from 2011 to 2014, the number of students seeking mental health services increased 8%. So not only do colleges have to deal with more students in general, so proportionately the number of students who are depressed you'd expect to increase, but also more students have been seeking mental health services, percentage-wise as well. Students used to go to counseling centers to seek information, but they're now going to seek treatment for serious psychological disorders such as major depressive disorder, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, and things like that. And 30% of students, the percentage of students that have been seeking or have seriously considered suicide at some point has increased. It's currently it was at 30% in 2014, up from 24% in 2010, which we feel is a pretty significant increase. And we feel that the problems that students experience from depression and the negative effect it has on their academics will increase based on depression. If a student is depressed and can't perform well in school, that can, of course, give them more reason to feel maybe depressed or worthless or sad.
So in terms of talking about the effects in school-wise, what depression does to students is obviously a major aspect of this project when we're discussing higher education. And what's actually interesting is in 2005, Western Michigan University actually took a second to look at this, and they associated that being depressed with depression, being diagnosed with depression, actually correlates to a 0.49% in your overall GPA. Obviously, being students, we know how large of a percentage that can be. And if that leads to being on probation or even dropping out of school, that obviously has a huge effect on the student as well as the overall higher education institution which they are attending. One major important thing to remember is that depression also affects your ability to focus and your ability to make good decisions. So that can actually affect your knowledge retention and the actual information that you're receiving while you are in classes. So that's a huge another aspect to look at as well. In terms of looking at URI and really targeting this project to URI, because that's one of our main aspects, if we were to look at the national average, which is 14%, is what is reported by the American College Mental Health Association. So 14% of students overall between universities and colleges suffer from depression. If we were to look at the current URI student database, which if you look on your right side there, you'll see that first pie graph, that would be 1,910% of the current students that are currently involved in the undergraduate programs at the University of Rhode Island.
Okay. And out of the 1,910 estimated depressed students at URI, 28% of those students are estimated to actually leave URI, whether it's by dropping out or transferring. This compares to URI losing roughly 18.5% of its freshman class, so disproportionately depressed students are more likely to leave the university. Overall, this translates 28% of the 1,910 depressed students at URI would translate to 539 students who drop out or transfer or leave the university and are depressed. We can't prove that it's because they're depressed, but studies have shown that being depressed is a significant risk factor for dropping out of your university. Okay, and if students are depressed, this is going to have an aggregate negative effect on academic institutions. Students overall will perform less well in school, And that's going to have negative externalities because it's been shown that when students are depressed, this can be disturbing to their peers and the people who come in close contact with them. This is also going to do harm to institutions' reputations. Of course, no institution would want to be known for having a depressed or unsuccessful student body. And then if schools are known for things like that, the applicant pool that they get is going to be less talented. And when students drop out, this can also result in a loss of revenue sources for the school. If a student drops out, the school can no longer get tuition. If the student lived on campus, then they're no longer paying the school to live on campus or maybe to have a meal plan or something like that. And tuition alone amounted to about $12,000 at URI recently. So if a single student drops out, that represents in 1 year at least a $12,000 loss for the school. So there are a lot of reasons to consider why people who do not receive treatment for depression report not receiving it. Because if we're designing programs to help these students, then it's important that we are aware of these problems. The main reason that students report, or that people reported in a large national survey for not receiving treatment, is that they did not think they could afford the cost. Fortunately, at school, counseling center services are mostly free, although they are typically meant to be temporary. So perhaps if counseling services are designed to be longer term for students, that will encourage people to seek treatment. There are also a lot of misconceptions about depression and the way that it's treated, which can be responsible for people not receiving treatment. A significant number of people reported not knowing where to go for services, maybe thinking that treatment wouldn't help, that they wouldn't have time for, or that they could handle the problem on their own. But depression is extremely receptive to treatment and is very flexible. A number of different treatments exist, which we will go into later. So again, we need to keep these reasons in mind when considering how to treat depression at URI.
In terms of going forward, one of the things that we obviously want to talk about is how to address the issue head on and how to attack it. That's going to include a multiple of resources, not only including the URI Counseling Center, but also our main idea is to target URI 101 as a main aspect of doing this, as well as the faculty and students that you work with. So we're going to divulge into that just a little bit more with Claudia starting off on the Counseling Center.
So I went to the URI Counseling Center and I spoke with Counselor Allison Homan about some of the feelings that she has about the Counseling Center. It's located in Roosevelt Hall and is supposed to have 9 full-time staff members, although it currently only has 7, and 2 of those 7 are also administrators, so they aren't actually able to devote much of their time to counseling students. The most common number of sessions that students have is 3, and when I was there, I noticed a surprising lack of information on depression. There were a number of brochures for things like eating disorders and gambling addiction, but there was not one for depression specifically. The school offers support groups for some reasons, but not for depression, and they will alternatively sometimes direct students to online support groups or encourage them to join clubs if they're feeling isolated from other students. The center is also not allowed to solicit students or send very disturbed ones home where they feel like it is no longer valuable to them or others for them to be at the university. And possibly the most important thing that I drew out of my interview with Counselor Homan is that she was of the opinion that the center would not even be able to come close to handling the number of students with depression if they all, or even close to all of them, came to the counseling center. So we need to consider alternative treatment options to the counseling center.
So obviously a main goal of ours throughout this project, which has been and continues to be, is implementing a module for informing and increasing the knowledge on depression and mental health within higher education. With URI being a major target for this project, URI 101 is obviously our aspect of doing that. The program overall, any new material you want to be introduced is done by Dane Jean Richmond of the University College, as well as the URI New Students Program. So that's one thing that we've really been involved with and will continue to do so. But our idea for including URI 101 is, since it is required course curriculum to be a student at URI your freshman year, it's a great way to get new information to students and help address this head on. Statistically, you're more likely to suffer from depression or have it onset in your college age years, and those years include 18 to 24. So really targeting those students head on during that time would be a great way to make a positive change. Since URI 101 is already included within the URI curriculum, we wouldn't have to increase faculty, we wouldn't have to increase spending on new courses, and it would be a great way to still have a cost-effective treatment plan for URI. Since the teaching is done with mentors as well, this would be a great way to also increase the knowledge that our mentors have on this issue so that they can help their students overall. One idea that we have is they can maybe be trained in what's called mental health first aid, which is a great project that has been long running, and actually you complete it over a course of either 1 day or 2 days, and you actually receive a certification that proves that you have completed the course and are a little more educated in dealing with mental health issues. In terms of what other schools are doing, that's also going to be a huge driving aspect in getting involved with URI 101, pardon me. Obviously, we want URI to be on the forefront and be innovative in terms of dealing with this issue. One thing that was really important to us was seeing what other colleges are doing. And the American Psychological Association actually, in September of 2014, divulged a large number of resources into really examining this problem specifically. And one thing that they mentioned was that you need to make a difference in the students' lives who are actually there and give them more than just a list of phone numbers to call on their own time and really address the issues that they currently have. One university that URI could strive to be like would be Aurora University, which the APA actually looked at in detail as well. One thing that's amazing that they do is they actually teach the faculty and go out of their way to teach faculty and mentors who have one-on-one relationships with students different psychological literature and different concepts from psychology that they can use to help motivate their students and help them, if they are dealing with depression issues, to stay involved in class, stay involved with their extracurriculars, and also make sure that they're not falling behind in any matter.
So we also want, in considering alternative treatment strategies, we want to consider maybe programs that already exist at URI or would be easy to implement that could possibly assist in mental health. Aerobic exercise specifically has been shown to be extremely effective at lowering depression scores on depression identification tests, and it's pretty effective as a monotherapy, so even without other therapies, it works pretty well at reducing symptoms. So this could easily be applied to, students could be encouraged to participate in intramurals or maybe in workout groups. That alone might be effective. We also would like to encourage participation in a school-run peer support groups. They're not as effective as established psychotherapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy, but they are still effective and they are extremely cheap to run, very flexible. They're basically run by the participants who act as volunteers. And we would also like to look at improving primary care screenings at URI because a lot of the symptoms of depression can show up in physical symptoms that people might not know as symptoms of depression. Screenings can be done for free online by reliable bodies like Butler Hospital, even a psychiatric hospital in Rhode Island. And the importance of healthy roommate relationships has also been shown in studies to be extremely important. So maybe roommate counseling could be given in URI orientation or by RAs. And forthcoming, we are pending IRB review, sending out a student survey to evaluate student experiences with depression, their experiences with the counseling center, and possible suggestions they might have for improving those experiences. We're also going to look into some more alternative treatments. For example, animal-assisted therapy is already used by URI during finals week when they bring therapy dogs on campus. So that would definitely be another possibility at URI.
Obviously, another major aspect of it is the cost-effective analysis, which we will continue to do so for our final presentation. That's also something that we'll continue to work with Jane Richmond as well. So obviously, in conclusion, we did cover a lot. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to divulge into it a little bit more, but we have discussed what depression is, why it is an issue that demands our attention right now, and why URI should be involved in dealing with that issue head-on and attacking the problem.
Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Mike. This is Mark. This is Kim. And we'll be covering the topic of the skills gap today. So first and foremost, we'll start right with the basics of the skills gap. So the skills gap, the basic concept of it is that there's employers demand a certain level of skills that they're just not attaining from the new up-and-coming supply of employees that are graduating from college. So based on that, there's a differentiation between the job training skills that employers can give these employees and the soft skills that are just interpersonal skills, communication, basic things like that. So the ACT found via some job site profiling that of about 16,000 jobs in the US, about 3 to 6 skills can define those in raw or real terms. One was applied mathematics, reading, locating information, observation, listening, and writing. So those are really key just to articulate what the skills are that these college graduates allegedly do not have as they enter the workforce. Okay. Next, the current model of paths to employment is the cloud graphic, as you can see over there. So this is the ambiguous type of model in which we are in right now, where students seeking employment just attend college, hope to land a job afterwards, and the employers really don't have much of a say in the process. The suggested hypothetical model would involve more on-the-job skills training, though it is expensive for employers and it's risky for firms with lower earning potential for employees to kind of serve as feeder programs to those more lucrative firms. Next, I just want to touch on public policy aspect of the skills gap in higher education in Rhode Island specifically. So according to there's a 2016 bill in the Rhode Island State Senate, the Performance Incentive Funding Act of 2016. Upon achieving metrics of graduation rates at URI for certain high demand and high wage majors, there would be incentive-based funding. The prioritization of these majors, such as pharmacy, nursing, engineering, computer science, and some more, would lead to a reallocation of resources to kind of focus on them, and in our assessment, or my assessment, the humanities and social sciences, such as we are in, departments, those would suffer in comparison, and thus without those resources to promote job readiness for those forgotten, potentially less lucrative or vocationally solid programs would get forgotten, and thus the abilities of those graduates might suffer as a result.
Thank you, Mike. Now, Mike does a great job of explaining to us all about the broad concept of the skills gap. My job in this project was to try to find out, how long does the skill gap exist? Does it go back all these years? I wanted to study the history, not only for the 21st century, but decades before that. So for the 21st century, I found a lot of great information relating to the skills gap of this generation. Now, the skills gap definition of this generation refers to 21st century youths graduating college, and they don't possess the same basic skills as the baby boomers do in the 1960s, 1970s. And so for the 21st century articles and blogs that I found, that definition was true. But when I dig deeper into that and I go into the 1970s and 1980s, I find something a little bit different. I find that it's not just because of these basic skills that they don't possess. It might not even be true. What I find out is that globalization was a big factor into this. Globalization, what I mean by globalization is I mean that technology has increased so rapidly that the baby boomers never had to deal with that. When we look at the history, I start off by the 1970s, I go upwards to the 1980s, 1990s, and then 21st century once again. The 1970s was basically the age of discovery, in the industrial market. What I mean by the industrial market, I mean that it's not affecting the labor force just yet. It's affecting the industrial market, globally, for companies. They experience, when these increase in technology, the companies itself, they experience increase in productivity, increase in work efficiency. And then the 1980s, that's when companies start to recognize the effect of this, recognizing the effect on the labor market. Employers, they recognize it as workers are applying for their job, but they're not fulfilling the needs to participate in those in their correct job efficiently. And workers, so the labor force, they experience that. They start noticing that because of when they're applying for the job, they don't really get it because they lack the needs of the technology advancement. So then for the 1990s, 10 years later, about 15 years later to be precise, a couple articles really goes into the training for companies, job training. So once you get hired, you get training for the job. Now, for about 10, 15 years, that worked perfectly because technology wasn't rapidly changing so much. But then once we hit the 21st century, it changed way too fast for companies to even keep up. So all that job training that came efficiently for employees coming in, and they got trained correctly, and then they had the efficient technology skills to work at the position. Now it was not so much because they had to change their job training every single year. So one year it's good, next year it's another one. So they had increased cost benefits for that too. The costing efficiency for companies was not too high. Now, this is so important for the 21st century because we're rapidly changing at such an excessive rate. If we look at these major occupation groups to my left, if you go about 4 or 5 rows down, you see the computer and mathematical occupations. It's a little blurry on there. But if you look to the right, about 3 columns to the right, you look at the percentage, you see that increase from 2014, that's the employment rate back in 2014, and then the estimated employment rate in 2024. You see a big jump with percentage-wise, 13.1%. And if you go down a little bit more, you see healthcare technical operations. And so you see all those more technological advanced positions increasing dramatically. And then you see other positions not so much, like food preparation, serving operations. They go up by like 3%. There's actually some positions that even decrease in the amount of employment that they once had. So you can definitely tell that technology has put a damp on the labor market, and Kim's actually going to go into why that is and what the issues are. So Kim?
All right, so for my portion of our assignment, I'm going to be looking at the end of work, and basically the end of work is the threat of technology taking over jobs or ending work as we know it. So I found this quote from Derek Thompson in the paper The Atlantic, and it says, "Technology could exert a slow but continual downward pressure on the value and availability of work, on wages, and on the share of prime age workers with full-time jobs." So basically, with the end of work, I'm going to be looking at the technical advantages that are coming for not only our generation, but for people who have already been working, that have been in the workforce for a number of years, and also what employers are going to be looking for in terms of technological capabilities and what kind of capabilities we're going to need in entering the workforce during this huge time of technological advancements. So first off, I wanted to go into AI, which is also known as artificial intelligence, which is also known as machine learning. And I thought that I'd add in a couple quotes of, what people in the industry are describing artificial intelligence as. So I found an entrepreneur. His name is Elon Musk. He made a speech at MIT and said that artificial intelligence is basically the creation of a rival to human intelligence as probably the biggest threat facing the world. And then Stephen Hawking also had an interesting quote that says, "The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. It would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate." And that's what a lot of people are afraid of, is that the technological advances are going to get so big that, these artificial intelligence machines and stuff like that are going to revamp and redesign themselves to, take over the human race. That's a stretch, but a lot of people describe AI as whatever hasn't been done yet is what artificial intelligence is. So then I thought that I would go into what technological advancements there are to be looking for. And I found that, as we talked about in class, Microsoft's Tay had a huge flop. Basically, they made Tay, it was a virtual assistant to go on Twitter, and she learned through whatever information was thrown at her. And, they were hoping for Tay to be asked questions about Microsoft and, about the company, but obviously the Twitter users abused that and started asking questions about the Holocaust and her opinion on Adolf Hitler and just horrible stuff like that, and it went out of control. And so that's one example of how, AI can be unsuccessful and how, we haven't perfected that by any means. Other things to look forward to soon. Apparently, Microsoft and Google are actually ahead of Apple right now, but there are major upgrades coming to Siri, which is by Apple, in iOS 9, which I think has just come out. And then Apple is planning to hire at least 86 full-time AI experts in the next year. So Apple's goal is to give users what they want before they know they need it, which is an interesting outlook. Nobody thought about Siri until it happened, and now a lot of people are using it. Also, Microsoft's Cortana, which is very similar to Siri, but it's much more Advanced, and IBM's Watson, which is used in hospitals. They can plug in any diagnosis into a machine, and Watson can basically tell you like what their disease is. Also, new technological advancements coming in the next year are self-driving cars, which is really interesting. I think Google is trying to get ahead in that game, and then robots as well, which is all very interesting. So I'm excited to do more research about what's coming up, and I hope that through my presentation and Mike and Mark's, you learned a little bit about the skills gap. So thank you. So stop this.
You let me out.
Hmm?